All right, so today we have a presentation entitled Navigating Library School During an International Pandemic. And I want to thank our 5 speakers for being here. Lenny Argabright from UNC, Kyle Minton from UNCG, Sydney Porter, UNCG, Florence Sloan, UNC Chapel Hill, and Leah Talbert from ECU. So if you all need anything from me, I'm here. Otherwise, I will turn it over to you.
Great, nice to see you, everybody. As I'm sure it's not at all surprising to any of you, COVID affected students and the way that they were learning information. So as future librarians ourselves, the 5 of us wanted to share some of our individual experiences during our time taking courses at various North Carolina Library School programs this last spring to reflect upon how to potentially improve learning and work experience opportunities for library students, and also to recognize some strengths and adaptability that library students can be bringing to their roles in the library field. So maybe we can first introduce ourselves really quickly, saying what our university affiliation is and our library focus is. I'm Lenny Argabright. I just graduated this last May from UNC Chapel Hill. I was in the information science program, and I'm interested in academic libraries.
Hi, my name is Kyle. I am attending UNCG. I'm going to graduate allegedly next month, and my focus is in public libraries. And I had a full-time job when COVID hit. That context.
Hello, my name is Sydney Porter. I go to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and my track is public libraries, and I also work for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library Systems during the COVID as well, or before.
Hi, my name is Florence. I'm a student at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm going to graduate in May 2021, and I was working as a student assistant at UNC's Wilson Library when COVID started, and I am focusing on archives.
Hi everyone, my name's Leah Talbert. I still am, I guess. I've finished all of my classes at East Carolina except the internship hours, and I actually started as a first-year librarian this past year, and so navigating through that as well as library school.
So we just, when choosing our panel, we wanted to try to give a broad perspective of the library school programs that are in North Carolina, including, like, we have East Carolina University and UNCG and UNC Chapel Hill, and also a vast variety of perspectives in our library focuses. So though we represent some of these different perspectives, we can only talk about our individual experiences, so just keep that in mind. So I thought we could start us off by, from your individual perspective, can you tell us about your experience being a student during COVID? Leah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So my individual experience, I was already, all of my courses are online. I actually am in Virginia. I'm a librarian in Greene County, just outside of Charlottesville. And so all of my courses were already online as it was. So there wasn't a lot of change in terms of me having to switch to online because I already was, but there was a little bit of a lot of actually leniency with my professors and really working with us. They really brought into the social emotional piece in terms of making sure to check on our welfare, making sure we knew that if we needed extension on assignments, so they really worked with us with that. So, but not too much change in terms, a few assignments had to be tweaked just because I was no longer in the library or able to enter classrooms to do things with kiddos. So that would be the only thing that kind of changed.
And also you had a summer class too, right?
Yes, so I had 2 summer classes. I actually wrapped up classes this summer. So I had 2 summer classes that started before my job finished, and I took those and condense those into like with the 5-week summer classes. And again, the professors were extremely supportive. And, I would say they probably adjusted definitely their the expectations of some of the assignments because we had to.
Because I was working on graduating, I had a master's paper that I had to finish by the end of the semester. So that was a little bit stressful, especially as I was having trouble as a student staying motivated. When it's like, it's a situation where there's simultaneously little change, like I am sitting in the same room for like months at a time, you know, but there's also so much different that's happening in the world and I'm powerless to like affect that really. So as a student, that was really hard for me to like keep motivated, but like my forum participation, it basically dropped off because like grades were no longer important. We were either getting pass or fail for our classes. So I only really started doing the tasks that I felt were going to be useful for more than just grades. And for my master's paper, I just like spent long hours at a time just to get it done. And it forced my mind to like focus on only thinking about that and not the world around me, which was sort of nice. But I could also see that it was going to be helpful for not just my grades as well. So that was some of my experiences being a student. What about you, Sydney?
So for me, like Leah had stated, I was all online, so nothing really changed. One of my classes, we changed from WebEx to Zoom, but as far as like navigating like school, my job actually closed March 17th, which kind of gave me a lot more time to just focus solely on school. So I was a lot more motivated in a sense to do exactly what I needed to do because I couldn't go anywhere. So for me, it kind of gave me like a boost or like more confidence in knowing that my time was my time and I could solely focus and devote all of my time to my schoolwork. So for me, nothing really changed besides moving from WebEx to Zoom.
I guess I'll jump off that since I'm also at UNCG. I have a full-time job with Wake County Public Libraries, and that didn't get converted to telework until I think, what is time? May maybe. And so what that meant is that I took 4 classes during the summer. I don't recommend that, but I did that. And so I was having 8 hours of telework and then having to do class, which was 3 hours once a week, and then depending on the class, and then homework after that. So I've been in my house a lot, and that's straining. So I think keeping focused, feeling like I was never productive enough, even though I was never not thinking about work or school, was also a problem. So yeah, it was just a lot of being in my home and looking at the computer too much.
Jumping off of that, when I had everything switched to online, it was really weird to be on my computer for both work from home and for classes and for everything else. And it was a process of learning how to divide up my time on my computer so I didn't burn out and lose my focus.
Something also that was what some of us noticed was our classes started to become a little bit more flexible. Kyle, did you want to like talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we had grade adjustment. I guess I should preface and say, I don't know if Sydney mentioned this, UNCG already being online meant that the infrastructure was already there to deliver these lessons by and large. But it also meant that, I personally was hearing from a lot of instructors, like, a lot of understanding and empathy, which was really important and really vital for making us feeling like this is a learning environment that understands that there's a lot of external factors that are contributing and really making it hard to focus. So but I tried to look on the bright side of it and actually incorporate, and I saw a lot of other students as well early on, incorporate COVID-related topics, and then later when the racial protests were going on, which is another crisis, obviously on top of everything, incorporating topics like that into schoolwork and really trying to be utilitarian about how we use this context and the situation that is so peculiar, and how many times have people heard the word unprecedented in the last 4 months, you know, and really try to visualize that within the schoolwork that they do. And I think that was a really useful way of putting all those feelings in practice.
I think one of the nice things about some of our classes is like the feeling of transparency that was starting to show up. Like my teachers were also experiencing this too. So they were being much more transparent in like their processes of teaching and like what their intentions were, so that as a student, I could feel like, okay, I know what's going on. I know what their expectations are. They're giving us updates. They are sending optional invitations to meet everybody on Zoom if you want, socially, just to deal with like self-care together if you want. But that transparentness in the process helped to make being a student more manageable. Okay, well, how about, how were your already online courses affected, like with group work or something like that? And what would be one takeaway that you would suggest for future online instruction?
Sydney, did you want to go? I didn't want to go immediately after.
Okay, I can go. My online classes, as I stated before, one of my classes, we moved from WebEx to Zoom. The only suggestion that I would have is just maybe my school, like all of our online classes are synchronized. So maybe providing in the future asynchronized courses, because I feel like it allows for more flexibility. And when times are, like when we do have pandemics or just natural disasters, we aren't stressed or feeling the need to have to meet because it's a requirement or because that's what our syllabus kind of says. My professors, excuse me, they were flexible during the pandemic, but I believe going forward, maybe like asynchronized classes. That's just my opinion.
There's a question in the chat about UNCG's recorded lectures, and they are recorded. The line of thinking that I've heard from UNCG faculty is that the synchronized lessons are meant to encourage student engagement in the moment so that classes themselves become instructive kind of on the fly from other students' contributions. But you know, I think you have to weigh that versus the accessibility of the program itself. If people are not able to attend that, particularly if people still are holding service jobs and going into unsafe environments and then coming home, you know, rushing to classes. So there are a lot of really, there's a lot more external factors to consider versus the prior arguments for synchronized classes. And I wanted to mention that one of the most important things to express is just empathy for other people is obviously central to our field, but you'd be surprised. I think it's a learned skill and it takes practice. And in these moments, particularly of like group work, you know, some people disappear because they have external factors, and sometimes people take less responsibility for group projects because they have kids, they have full-time jobs. I am very privileged to have a full-time job that paid and didn't have children to take care of. So, you know, I was okay taking on more work in some instances because I knew that I could, and that's okay. And I think that's actually very reflective of professional context as well that you'll encounter in the real world. So.
Leah, did you have anything to piggyback about regarding like group work during your COVID experience?
Yes. So I think with the group work, I mean, it could get challenging at times, like Kyle mentioned, because you didn't know what everybody else was going through. Now, I will say that I had actually the best probably group experience I had through this last few classes that I took. So I don't know if I just looked out with that, but my group just meshed, and we understood that, you know, we all had things going on, and life was crazy and difficult, and we just encouraged each other. And like, again, like Kyle said, brought in that empathy piece of we understand and we're going to support each other. I do think that just to take away, maybe if you're having to shift to online, or if you're already online, I had some really great professors that really built in a lot of class community. And that went a long way at the end when things got crazy, that we could lean on each other and talk to each other in discussion posts, and just kind of, like Lenny was saying too, just a little bit of self-care, just a little bit of social emotional piece really went a long way. So just building in as much classroom community as you can along the way is huge.
Oh, and then there was something else that we wanted to bring up. It was related to like the flexibility of the content that happens in classes too, with adding in like social justice topics. You were talking about that, Kyle. Can you explain like how that was helping you to cope with what sort of work you were getting?
I mentioned it a little bit, but I'll give two specific examples. There was, I cannot remember his name, so I'm so sad that I can't cite his work, but there's a guy who did a really great infographic in one of my media production classes about, you know, proper hand washing technique and face and mask wearing, designed for like a really eye-catching workplace sign, which is very important as someone who is now working in a library where it's really hard to remind yourself of all these safety practices, and it takes like eye-catching engagement to keep us mindful and safe. The other example is I created a resource for starting discussions about the presence of police and security in libraries after the protest started. And that was really helpful to me to feel as though this is a valid conversation that could be had, and here's a resource with which anyone can take and start a discussion in their own library. And I've had interest for, you know, people wanting to contribute to that, and that's been super nice. So I think any realistic implementation that you can make, you know, obviously don't tie yourself fully to current events, because hopefully we will see the other side of this one day. But I think if you can, it makes you even more valuable to employers if you're graduating soon, I think, as well, which is something to be mindful of.
Okay, here's a question for Florence. What was the experience of learning like as you were in an unfamiliar, interrupted environment? At UNC Chapel Hill, we have primarily in-person classes. So how did learning change for you, Florence?
I think we had COVID hit right when we had spring break, and so spring break was extended by a week, and professors were using that week to turn in-person classes into online classes. And like even the first week when we were back for classes via Zoom, we were still working out. And I really appreciated professors including us in that decision-making process of how we would learn best at the moment, and then making changes in the syllabus that reflected that. So that was really great, and I think that helped me learn more throughout the semester.
Do you have an example of like some technique that you guys were talking about that helped the learning happen?
Mm-hmm.
That you can think of?
For one class, my professor made all of the assignments optional because a lot of people were having trouble focusing on doing that, and so instead we focused all of our time on readings and discussion of readings, and I think that led to some very good class discussion.
That's awesome. I was at the time, and my in-person class had been turned into online, and it happened to be an instruction class in 4 libraries: academic libraries, public libraries, school libraries. And so the class itself was already meta because like, here's this teacher teaching about how to teach. But then it became even more meta because now it was like the next topic that we had was going to be about digital like learning. And so here we are now in a digital learning space. We can be practicing these tools that can, like, as if we are patrons experiencing the instruction, and also see how an instructor can adapt. So that was really interesting, in having a teacher who's transparent about how she is teaching was really helpful. So I would say, like, a takeaway for future learning could be like to have unique ways to engage with the material. I personally hardly get much value out of forum posts, just because even in my regular time, it just doesn't feel to me like it's an alternative replacement to in-person discussion. But that's why I took an in-person, like, school class. Instead, like, an example of a learning engagement tool could be like having us all fill out a chart together, where, like, we have to think about particular patrons' experiences, perspectives, and then we can see the other people in our class, their responses. And this could feel like a really generative type of learning, and like a valuable resource to add to my toolkit. So that was one example of, like, something that we did in that class that was, like, really effective.
Can I piggyback off that for just 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to say that, UNCG uses Canvas, and every instructor organizes Canvas a unique way, which can be good, but oftentimes means that you're just adjusting to the layout of a class every time there's a new class, which is not beneficial to accessibility, particularly if students are coming in with a lower degree of digital literacy, which some students are. And so I think, I'm not advocating for regimented LMSs for every student. I realize that every professor has their needs, but I do think making those spaces, if you're going to go with a discussion board, it needs to be moderated and encouraged, because it's hard for students in a room to just generate thoughtful conversation from a distance. But also so that students know where to find that information and know exactly where on their LMS to go for relevant information, because sometimes that was difficult, and I feel pretty comfortable with computers. So.
Does anybody else have anything to add about, like, learning takeaways before we move on to the next question? Okay. So how would you describe your individual experience juggling work and life and school? Sydney, did you want to start?
Yeah, I can go. So for me, I've been in school like nonstop. So it's kind of just been, like, ingrained in me to, like, wake up, go to work, go to school, go to sleep, repeat. I graduated from UNCC last year, and then I instantly, like, went on to get my master's degree, and I graduated high school in 2014. So I think for me, it's more of, like, not necessarily juggling, but just trying to manage, like, the different workloads, because with different classes, there is, like, different demands for the workload. But as far as my job is very flexible. My life is literally just school and work right now, because I know that I'm pressing on to a higher goal. So with that, I just try to keep, like, a positive mindset, and knowing that it's gonna be over, and not in necessarily a negative way, but my hard work is gonna come to an end, in a sense, May of next year. So that's for me, like, I'm doing pretty well, trying to live a balanced life.
I think it probably also that, like, you had that period of time where, like, you could focus on school because you weren't working, and then, would that be correct? It helped.
Yes, it did help. It helped me reevaluate and myself and what I like to do if I'm not at school or working. So that did help. I started journaling and, like, going on walks and things like that. So it just allowed me to get to know who I am a little more.
as someone who had to account for 8 hours of telework every day, my experience is a little different. I will just say that I watched a lot of webinars, and webinars have a very bad reputation. If you're watching this, don't believe them, because this one's great, right? But I will say that it contributed a lot to my last part of my LIS education, because sources like WebJunction and other webinar providers for library professionals, you see such a wide swath of what's possible within libraries. And I really think that's the purpose of going to a library focused program. I can't speak to archivists or other experiences, but going and seeing those just various projects, even if it's from 2015, an example of like, what does a coding lab look like if your library doesn't have one? And really getting to see a real life example helps you bring, especially if you don't have the privilege to work in a library currently, that's a really great way to see exactly how library work is planned for and conducted, and then how feedback is received and analyzed. So you can get a really great education in a couple hours time with a few webinars. And I know that like, it's not the most engaging material a lot of the times, but it was really helpful. And so having to commit to that for telework really helped me bring a new perspective to the schoolwork that I was doing. And also, it's really hard to fill 8 hours a day. Like I have to add that an early webinar that I watched through the Public Library Association of America really stressed this fight against constant productivity. And I mentioned it earlier, but be easy on yourself, be gentle with yourself, and understand that, 8 hours of work, your telework job, think about what 8 hours of work generally looks at your library. Generally, it doesn't work like you're working constantly. That's not exactly healthy, and it's not particularly productive either, because you just burn out. So I think noting that is really important.
So I'll jump in. So just kind of juggling work life and library school. So not only was I juggling library school and work life, but I was also juggling being a first year librarian and finding my way in that. I did have a really great mentor this year who was super supportive, but it was a little difficult at the end, because when we went home, when schools closed on March 13th here in Virginia, I was still right in the middle of schoolwork, and then trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do my job at home to support teachers, and also, still potentially get books in kids' hands. And so we actually ended up opening a curbside library. And so every week we were, kids were putting books on hold. We were pulling those books. We were handing those books out. We did it with our meal pickups for the school. And so it was a lot. And then teachers that were not technology savvy, there was a lot of support that was needed. So I was on Zoom sessions with them constantly, trying to give them ideas of how they could work things, how they could do things, how they could best support their kiddos. But it was a little tricky. Now, with that said, because I was at home, I did have a little bit more flexibility with when I did assignments. Typically, for me, it's at night, and definitely all the weekends are just schoolwork, grad school work. And so, so that was able to be adjusted a little, and I did have some opportunities to get some things done during the school day while I was monitoring email and checking in. But just trying to figure out how to best serve my kids and my teachers and finish up school was tricky.
And Leah, you also have kids. How is handling that part of your life versus
Thankfully, my kiddos are older. So I have a son and a daughter. My son was finishing up 11th grade, and my daughter was finishing up 7th. And so they could pretty much handle themselves. I mean, there was still an amount of checking in and making sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do. But, with their school, they were just kind of in emergency mode. And so there wasn't real teaching happening. It was just kind of checking in and giving kind of optional assignments. But yeah, so being a mama, a wife, first year librarian, finishing up classes, it got a little crazy. Oh, and then, just being asked to develop PD for teachers to learn online, how to do online learning at the same time. So I actually moderated a course in Canvas for high school teachers to learn about online learning and blended learning towards the end. And that was a crazy week. So I'm getting ready next week to moderate the middle school teachers doing theirs. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, good luck.
Thanks.
Okay, as a student, had any of you learned anything about emergency planning? And is there anything that you'd recommend for future preparedness? Lawrence, do you want to kick us off? I know you had an actual class.
I would be happy to. I took disaster planning last fall, and it's just one of the funny things. We did not cover pandemics in that class. If I was to look at COVID, and so as we're still trying to get through this day to day, I would suggest if you have a disaster plan, especially because it's hurricane season around the coast as well. If you have a disaster plan, it might be good to review it and look for ways that COVID might impact how you would prepare for it or respond to a disaster, and make sure that what's on there is still doable and practical.
So in the class, you covered like hurricane, like weather type of emergencies. Is any of it like translatable to pandemics?
I think so. It's expect the unexpected, and you won't really know if your plan works very well until you really have to use it. And you hope that you'll never have to use it.
Thanks.
I feel like I'm kind of in a unique situation with that. Like we didn't have a class on, emergency preparedness, and no one could prepare you for COVID, but just being the school track, school library track, and having been a teacher for 17 years, I felt like it's ingrained in us or you learn it very quickly when you first start, that you have to be flexible and adjust very quickly. Because, for example, there might be a day where you plan this fabulous lesson online and you come in and the internet's not working. So, so I think that in a way that was extremely helpful for me, because, we kind of come to expect the unexpected, because you never know what you're going to get.
I didn't particularly take a class, but I do have a recommendation like for future preparedness. And it goes along like maybe the lines of budget, because I fortunately worked for a system that like still paid us while we were out, but I know others were like furloughed and just took pay cuts. And I think that maybe we could have like maybe a budget in place or some type of like emergency fund for students who are working in these libraries or like interning, or like some type of stipend just in case on the back burner this happens, because they're still depending on that money. And if you're paying for like school and also paying for like your apartment, and you just lose your job, but you still have to go to school, it can be hard. So having like some type of budget or some type of like emergency stipend would alleviate some stress for students, I think.
Yeah, and I would advocate 2 points. And one that I'm actually going to recommend the book Because Internet by Gretchen McCulloch, because I think even before a pandemic, digital communication is very difficult, and we all have our own tones. We all have our own way of expressing ourselves online. And if you don't see people on camera, which you often don't in these online programs, people don't like to be on camera. I do not like being on camera, so I empathize. But I think it's really important to understand the differences in digital speech. Thank you for linking to that. And I don't think people think about it a lot, especially even before I didn't think about it a lot. And I kind of wish that I'd read that book before I started my program, and it's even more important now. And I will say that, leaving the program, library advocacy obviously becomes far more vital now, given that we're fighting in budgets and really advocating for our continued survival in communities that need us. But I also think it's just as important to look at employers and go, how will you protect me from this? Wake County Public Libraries has been really great, and they're my employer full time, and we do no contact delivery of books. That's felt much safer to me than if I had been asked to do curbside. So, I think if you're a student and you're looking at employers that you're interested in, I think it's also careful to see how they're treating people now. Particularly paraprofessional staff, people who aren't going to go to LIS education for a whole host of reasons, accessibility and otherwise, and see, are they taken care of? Because they're your coworkers, you should care about them. And we don't talk about labor rights in library school the way that we probably should. So I would recommend that people factor that in, because, and especially in a right to work state like North Carolina, all we have are the advocacy of our colleagues and our community. And I'm very lucky to work in a library that actually has a history of civil protests to keep the library open. And I got to cite that in a paper. So, looking at the history of the places that you want to work at, see how people were treated, see how there's a lot to it. And I understand that it's a tense subject, but I do think that it's very important if you want a career in this field to consider that and see how we look out for one another.
And I know as students, we can be having work experiences that can be related to like access. Like a fellow student, Katie Kehoe, was presenting about the digital divide based on like her earlier today in an earlier panel today. And she had this great experience to be able to help with the community and providing access to information. And we're, just library students. We can be participating in emergency planning for the community, for the university, for whatever our specific library focus is. It just helps to have an idea of what we can do. Okay, so maybe one more question before we open it up for audience questions. What is one thing that you would promote in your career one day based on some experiences you've had this past spring? Meaning like things that you will try to be doing yourself, like in your own career.
I'll go. I guess for me is just trying to give work experience opportunities or get work experience opportunities so that I'm actually in the field and it can be paired with what I am learning while I'm in school. I think that is very important to get the experience along with the book knowledge, because sometimes our knowledge or what we go to school for is literally kind of like background or like the history, but I feel like actually getting into the library and really getting myself out there and getting more experience will help me in my career journey.
I'm going to kind of echo what I just said about paraprofessionals, and that I really do think that we should value the contributions and work of every single individual who contributes to the physical labor that we do. I think that's super essential and something that I don't see a lot of, and I would like to see more of, particularly like pages who are often in very vulnerable contexts and aren't paid living wages. So I think as someone who has had the privilege to go through a program, come out with a degree that will give me access to higher positions, I think it's the duty of everyone in that position, particularly in public libraries, to advocate for the people who who do not have that and don't have the privilege of being paid a livable wage during a national emergency, which they absolutely should. So.
I think because my interest is so focused around open access, it's something that I think about a lot, about people having access to information. And especially with COVID, where we're not as able to all be like right next to each other if we want, we have to communicate in a very different sort of way. Some of us don't have Wi-Fi at our homes. Some of us don't have computers at our homes. Some of us have to bring our laptops into our car, into a different parking lot, like one of our teachers had to do, to be able to communicate online. And so I think something that I would try to do in my career based on these experiences is like having that flexibility, trying to think about, okay, so if you can't be in this synchronously, maybe like here's a different way that you can engage. Or if you don't really engage in a way that is as good at just like talking like we are doing now, maybe there's a different way that you would engage better. Maybe like here's some food for thought to think about, and then you can be learning like from that in a way that's more conducive to your learning. And so all of these theories about online learning is a big area to be stressing in a job that's not specific to, like we're not going to be, hopefully, in a COVID type of world for the rest of our careers. I'm gonna knock on wood here. But we can still incorporate a lot of online learning theory that is in the literature that we're talking about as students, that we are hearing about from other people.
And sorry, I just want to quickly say, because I would feel terrible if I didn't include this. I had two really fantastic managers in Wake County Public Libraries that super contributed to both the flexibility of being able to do the schedule that I had, and also just contributed to the lessons that I was taking in. Michelle Hildreth is actually presenting in another room, and she was the first person who managed me in libraries and is a fantastic human being and definitely contributed to it. So if you have the fortune of being in a middle management position, that empathy and degree of with which you will teach what you know is super important. I don't just assume that your employees or the LIS students are kind of like, oh, whatever, I just want to get through like class, and like be proactive, offer it. And I guarantee you that they are probably looking for it.
Leah, Florence, do you have anything that you'd like to add about like what you'd like to do in your career based on what you experienced this spring?
Sure. So when I actually started this past year as first year, I really came in and tried to make sure that teachers understood that, you know, I'm a teacher librarian. And so I would be there to collaborate with them, lesson plan with them, you know, come into their classrooms, co-teach stuff. And then, so I would just continue to move forward with that and really kind of try to make people see the value of having a teacher librarian and pulling resources and, you know, partnering with them. And then also having had this happen where, again, teachers are now all online, it really kind of hit home to where maybe I need to develop some, you know, little short PDs, kind of pit stop PDs on ideas of how you can incorporate some more engaging activities into your lessons, and just kind of short and sweet, easy to do, and that way they have, you know, more tools in their tool belt to help if we, you know, continue to have to do this. And then just, you know, because you can use the same tools. Good teaching is just good teaching, whether or not you're in the classroom or online. And so some of those instructional strategies, I think, could really go a long way to help. So, and moving forward, that's kind of an idea.
I think something that I would like to take forward into my career, because I am really interested in disaster planning, is not letting the disaster plan switch to the back burner, being aware of what is going on in the world and if that might affect how successful your disaster plan might be. To, in the event that you do have to use it, make it as not stressful as possible.
Okay, so we do have a great question, and maybe the people who are going to continue being in school for this fall can answer this. Do you have any advice for students starting library school this fall?
For me, I just think that the advice that I can give is just go in knowing that you've already won the battle and knowing that this is what you're called to do or this is your purpose. So give 100%, 110%. Don't just go through the motions, genuinely seek to take something out of every single class. And if you need a break, give yourself a break. My professors have been like very understanding, and both of my semesters that I've been in school, so the year I've been in school, I have yet to encounter a professor who I told I just wasn't feeling it or that didn't give out mental health days. So I say take advantage of that and just be calm, because the world isn't really going back to normal anytime soon. So a lot of rules aren't really going to be strict, I believe. So just take things as they are and just go with the flow.
You have another question about homework. Are there any tips for motivation when you're struggling to get homework done?
Okay, so
Sorry.
go. Okay.
You can go.
So I had a lot of trouble with motivation to get homework done this spring. So I think something that was helpful for me was, and harmful for me, but I was like browsing Twitter. And so seeing like what resources people were posting was like related to digital scholarship, related to scholarly communications. It was a big part of what my master's paper was about. So I was soaking in things that I was learning that I could use for my classes. So it wasn't necessarily helpful for me to learn to do my homework of reading assignments, but it was helpful. That was a way that would help me to have motivation to add into my like other types of assignments.
I'm gonna go the opposite direction and say I try not to think about work at all in certain moments. I started a garden, and that was really lovely. These cut flowers are hastily arranged by me, and that was super lovely to just like go and see beautiful flowers in my yard for like 5 to 10 minutes at a time. It was very important for me to feel sane, and oftentimes, you know, that moment to think gives you the inspiration to tackle whatever is, you know, your hurdle in that moment. So I would advocate a physical hobby of some kind.
Sydney, is that what you were going to say?
No, I was going to say set a schedule for yourself so that you know like on what days this needs to be done. Also like reward yourself. So if it takes like you telling yourself like, if I get this homework done, then I'll be able to sit around and watch TV or something like that. Like you have to put those boundaries in place. And it may sound like childish or babyish, but like only you are in charge of what you can do for yourself. So for me, like I like to do my homework when class was over, because I was still in that mindset of learning and I was taking in everything that was going on. Or I like to do it like the day after, but I only enjoy doing work from Monday through Thursday. So I always wanted my weekends to myself. If I still had homework during the weekends, then I felt like it was my fault because I didn't utilize my time wisely. But like I said, just be very gentle with yourself. And if you're not motivated and you just don't feel like you can give your all, then you may need to contact your professor and ask for an extra day. Like I know one of my professors offered flex days, to which you got an extra day to do an assignment. You just had to ask like in advance. But as far as like any type of motivation, candy, snacks, movies, do whatever you have to do to tell yourself like, I can't do this until I do this.
Sydney, you're getting a lot of love in the chat.
Hi, thank you guys, love you all.
I also wanted to mention for students who would be coming into the fall, I was just thinking like, we don't necessarily know how much longer it will last past the fall. So work experience has been so important for us. And online work experience, working from home, it's a little bit harder to develop those sort of connections. So as many questions as you can ask to your teachers about like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? To explore what the world of library science is. Like, do you want to go into special libraries, even though you had no idea that that existed? Like, just asking questions can help to start opening other questions up, and like not being afraid of trying to get informational interviews, because librarians are like really nice.
right, everyone. Well, we have about 1 more minute left. Are there any questions for our fabulous panelists? By the way, Sydney, when you talked about how important work experience is, I could not agree more. All the people I know who had trouble finding jobs after library school were the people who didn't get any work experience during library school.
Yeah, I recommend even volunteering because I volunteered at my library even before I received my job, was offered my job. And even still to this day, I'm like trying to improve and just keep on working to become that great person that I know I can be.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. I want to thank you all so much. This is